Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, welcoming you to an all-new Ace in the Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode I shall be reviewing the Mitsubishi A6M3 Model 22 Reisen, a Japanese naval fighter coming into battle rating of 5.0 and tier of 3. To appreciate the history behind this aircraft, we must go back to the spring of 1942 and consider what made the A6M3 a failure. For reference, the A6M3 was meant to be the successor to the already proven A6M2 Model 21, whereby the A6M3 would improve upon the Model 21's top speed in the dive, and high speed controllability along with its roll rate. To achieve the first two factors, a new A21 1130 horsepower radial engine was to be integrated, and to achieve the latter two factors, the wingspan was to be reduced and the wingtips were to be clipped. However, there was one offset by introducing the new A21 engine. Its larger size and heavier nature meant that the main fuselage fuel tank had to be reduced in size, and in turn this caused the range of the A6M3 to come in at 1,477 miles, by comparison with the A6M2's 1,930 miles. This was a major issue when it came around to the Guadalcanal campaign of 1942, with A6M3 units complaining that by the time they had reached Guadalcanal, flying from Buin or Rabaul, they had bingo fuel or critical fuel for actually achieving any combat service before flying back to base to rearm and refuel. Mitsubishi was needed to solve this problem by the second half of 1942, and this was achieved as follows. Mitsubishi started out by realising that in order to improve the A6M3 back to its pure form, it had to return to the form achieved in the A6M2. This was done by integrating the larger wingspan of the A6M2 and the rounded wingtips, whereby the rounded wingtips, when they were reintroduced, also featured a single 12-gallon fuel tank in each wingtip. This extended the range of the A6M3 to 2,030 miles, making the range the largest of any given Zero variant. On top of this, the A21 engine was retained, and the standardised armament of two 7.7mm Type 97 machine guns based above the engine, and two 20mm Type 99 cannons, one to each wing, was also retained. And so this formed the basis of the A6M3 Model 22, with the Model 22 designation referring to the fact that this was the A6M3 returning to the purer form of the A6M2. A6M3 Model 22s were rolled out by the end of 1942, early 1943, with a total of 560 being produced. The last few production runs also featured the new and improved Type 99-2 cannon, and the production of the A6M3 Model 22 was to give way by the second half of 1943 to the arrival of the A6M5. With our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the A6M3 Model 22 shapes up in War Thunder. Our gameplay for today is taken from the airfield domination map Sicily, using the following setup. Omni-purpose belts for our 7.7mm machine guns. As whilst the effectiveness of the machine guns in general is rather limited, the mixture of tracer, armour-piercing and adjustment incendiary rounds can bolster this somewhat. On top of this, we are using the omni-purpose belts for our 20mm cannons, as 3/4 of the rounds here are high explosive in nature, leading to widespread damage to an enemy aircraft's fuselage when instant. The final quarter is an armour-piercing incendiary round, which has the opposite effect of providing more concentrated damage towards enemy aircraft engines and fuel tanks, perhaps even igniting them and leading to a brutal blaze. We bring this all together with a 400-metre gun convergence, reason being that our playstyle is a mixture of turn and burn and boom and zoom, and not an individual type, and so this gun convergence allows us to mix it up when and where appropriate. Finally, we are using a 45-minute fuel load, as this is the lowest offered to us and the one that will allow us to make it to the end of the game in terms of our fuel load unscathed. Therefore we begin this review by analysing the climb rate of the Mod 22. It is practically the same as with the A6M3, but the difference is with a battle rating of 5.0 you can no longer outclimb a good portion of your foes. Instead it is you who is being outclimbed by planes such as the Focke-Wulf 90 D9, the F8F-1 Bearcat and the Spitfire F Mark 16. Spitfire F Mark 14. Nonetheless, there is one item in the favour of the Mod 22, and that is its ability to initiate climbs much more rapidly by comparison with its counterparts. What do I mean by this? Well, as you saw there, our initial climb took us to 3,000 meters, whereby we cut our climb off with a speed of 260 kilometers an hour. Thanks to our great acceleration up to a speed of 350 kilometers an hour, we were able to start our climb once again at approximately 300 kilometers an hour, to the same approximate rate. To achieve a similar effect as our Focke-Wulf 190D9, you need to take your speed up to 400 kilometers an hour once again in order to do so. And so this is one item in the favour of the Mod 22. Its ability to enable climb stints a lot faster than its counterparts. And so that means that this plane can get up to higher altitudes quite rapidly, but perhaps just not as rapidly as its other opponents. Nonetheless, having dispatched a rather oblivious Yak-9K, or perhaps they were away from their keyboard, we now proceed to go into a head-on with a Yak-9T. But when we say head-on, we do not mean in a head-on engagement by shooting at the Yak-9T and having them shoot at us, as our durability will not allow for this, and in general the durability of the Mod 22 is very low, and its flammability is rather high. But instead we are taking an offset head-on, using our greater manoeuvrability on the rudder and the ailerons, and the elevators to some extent, in order to dodge the incoming fire of the Yak-9T and force them to overshoot. Here we play them out in the vertical and force them to use their superior engine power to overshoot and fall victim as a second kill. We then roll into a split S using our decent roll rate, which stays with us even up to a speed of approximately 750 km an hour, in order to get away and reconsider the situation. Upon looking around and making sure our opponent has burnt to death, we notice that we are now the highest fighter on the map, and so we can go from turn and burn to boom and zoom. In the meantime, we are trying to look for a new target, but we have to come onto the fact that this plane inherits the best features from both the A6M2 and the A6M3. The manoeuvrability is akin to the A6M2, with the turn circle being a little bit tighter by comparison with the A6M3 base variant, and in general the controls respond much more nicely. It really does feel as though it's an extension of the overall pilot sitting in the cockpit, rather than a forced plane that the A6M3 did feel in some respects, showing versatility but at the cost of some of the manoeuvrability that you found in the A6M2. We see an I-185 below us here, and as we demonstrate our roll rate that stays with us to increase in speed, as already mentioned, we initiate a split S and come down for the I-185. Of course we do not make our intentions clear, looking towards the Spitfire and the Messerschmitt 109 before coming around. And once again, we can very quickly dispatch our opponent with swift precision, with the 20mm cannons leading to devastating results when concentrated onto the target accurately. And we then look towards a Focke-Wulf 190 and a Ki-61 directly in front of us, perhaps pursuing our friendly bowfighter. Although here I make the mistake of not making up my mind, and this leads to me going into a head-on with a Ki-61 Mark I Co, directly ahead right now, and taking a grazing shot from their machine guns. This sole burst actually punctures my leading fuselage fuel tank, and leads to a very large fuel leak which will stay with me thanks to my lack of self-sealing fuel tanks all the way to the end of the game. And that is a key item to realise, that due to the lack of self-sealing fuel tanks on this aircraft, if you are ruptured in that way, you are going to have a nasty trail of black smoke following you all the way through to the end of the match unless you land for repairs. Looking around, however, we have been able to break away from the rest of our opponents down in the lower altitude furball, due to the fact that we can abuse the higher dive speed of the A6M3 Mod 22 in a similar fashion to that we would in, say, a Focke-Wulf 190A4. This means that we do not have to worry about controlling our speed anymore in dives, as our roll rate stays with us to 750 km an hour, iterated for the third time now, and our control surfaces stay with us all the way up to this same speed in terms of the elevator, the ailerons and the rudder, which means we no longer have to be frightened of lock-up in any measure. Even with the A6M2's lock-up at 400 km an hour, and that on the A6M3 at approximately 650 km an hour, the Mod 22 has this beaten in all respects. We notice an enemy LA9 harassing a friendly Wellington, and also perhaps falling victim to a Messerschmitt 109 on our team, and so we decide to push for higher altitude whilst the enemy fighters are engaged in the furball up at a moderate altitude of say 1,500 metres. This means we can rebuild our altitude advantage, although our limited climb rate does mean that we will be susceptible to having planes climb up towards us, although we'll come to that in a second. Continuing to look around, we also have to take into account that the black smog on our plane now means that we are quite a clear target. In terms of control surfaces, this plane handles very nicely in terms of all of its control surfaces. Its turn circle, as mentioned earlier, is akin to the A6M2, which is one of the tightest turn circles on any given fighter aircraft in the game, especially for the battle rating. The roll rate is decent. It is by no means the best, but it is enough to get by, and again it is a switch from the A6M3's roll rate more towards that on the A6M2, but one that stays with you for an extended period of time. And the rudder is incredibly powerful, much like the rudder on, say, a P-39 Aerocobra. Nonetheless, returning to the dogfight here, the LA9 comes for a pass, and so we use the same approach as with the Yak-9T. A sharp kick on the rudder and the ailerons, dodge the incoming fire if it comes our way, and force our opponent to stall out, or at least overshoot for an easy kill. With our fourth kill now in the bag, we see an enemy Focke-Wulf 190 A5U2 trying to climb up underneath us. So instead of trying to climb away because we cannot do so, we simply just balance ourselves out on our rudder and ailerons and force them to go into a stall, whereby we can shred them to pieces with our cannons and machine guns and either have them as a kill, or in this case force them to eventually land or crash into the ground. And this is one of the key items that goes with the Mod 22. Yes, your climb rate in a given stint is rather poor by comparison with your battle racing contemporaries, but because your manoeuvrability stays with you at any given speed, whether it be 150 km an hour where the stall point of this plane is, all the way up to 750 km an hour, the fact that your manoeuvrability is retained means that you can do amazing feats by comparison with a good portion of the energy or turn fighters you may notice. Again, we see an LA7B-20 coming out of the spawn, and we also force a G4M1 to have to reconsider their options and dive down towards lower altitudes. We are not going for spawn killing here, but merely putting some pressure on at higher altitudes above the enemy spawn point, that way forcing our opponents to climb up towards us, therefore necessitating a clean cut kill, or having them just fly at lower altitudes and therefore stay down. The LA7B-20 once again makes themselves an easy target, stalling out, and then we can come around rapidly and pick up what is another kill. In fact, it is our ace in a day. We then break off and continue to look behind us and below us to notice an enemy F8F-1 Bearcat climbing after us. And whilst at the moment we are pulling away, we will eventually be caught up thanks to a better climb rate in general, and so we decide to Immelman and come around. But again, we take the indirect head-on approach to force them to miss their shots if they place them, and have them stall out or overshoot. Here we come around, and essentially as they overshoot into position and stall out simultaneously, we pick up our 6th kill, showing that just because you have the better performance in your engine does not mean that you are going to make life very difficult for those of us in slower aircraft. And keep in mind, the A6M3 Mod 22 has a top speed of approximately 580 km an hour if I remember correctly. That is approximately 120 to 150 km an hour lower than most of the aircraft you will face. So you have to keep this in mind when trying to run away from aircraft on the level. So as we kill off a 7th aircraft, a Messerschmitt 19G2 Trop, we'll talk about this in more depth. If you go up against opponents, and this is most notable in ground strike, if you go up against opponents who decide to, instead of engaging you, break past you and take a pot shot at you in that head-on, you'll find it very difficult to chase after them thanks to the fact you have a limited top speed. The acceleration of this aircraft is rather low, even in a dive as we take out this LA7 here, and what this means is that above 325 km an hour when the acceleration peters out by comparison with that at lower speeds, you will not be able to chase down your faster opponents. Instead you are just going to have to let them get away and come around for another head-on pass, or alternatively, break down towards lower altitudes and find a new target. And this limitation can feel rather frustrating at first, as we dodge the incoming approach of an XP-50 and the incoming fire from a climbing Focke-Wulf 190A. Fortunately here we still have enough energy to dodge the next pass on the XP-50 who is close to stalling out here, as the Focke-Wulf 190 below us does stall out, and it allows us to pick up what is, I believe, our 9th and final kill for this gameplay. We also see a Messerschmitt 19G trying to climb up towards us, but they fall victim to a friendly Messerschmitt 410B. And so here we level out and fly away from the enemy spawn, having caused irreparable damage to the enemy team's lineup. And so returning to the final point in terms of pursuit ability, this plane suffers from the low top speed, low high speed acceleration, and therefore the inability to pursue its faster foes over the longer distances. Indeed, this is also reciprocated in a dive. Unless you have approximately a 1000 meter altitude advantage from your opponent when you go into a dive, you're going to find it very difficult for getting away from foes, whether it be a Typhoon Mark 1B or say a Spitfire F Mark 9. We see here a B-17 coming out of the spawn, and so we decide to go for the head-on, as going head-on against bombers can actually prove rather effective. Here we are fortunate to take grazing fire from the B-17, and rather lucky in a good portion of respects, and this is not archetypal of the nature of the Mod 22. But there is also something to consider concerning B-17s and bombers in general, which we will come on to after the post-game stats. Ergo, we can see that our 9 kills allowed us to obtain 35,119 silver lions. On top of this, we accreted 1,850 research points, all going towards our work on the M1K2J. We hereby conclude our review of the A6M3 Mod 22 Reisen by carrying on with our final point concerning enemy bombers. Due to the comparable top speed of this fighter with enemy bombers that you may face at the battle rating of 5.0, you could indeed find that B-17 pilots and Year 2 pilots in particular will try to pursue you in level flight and use their turrets to bring you down, akin to a gunship. In situations such as this, where you do not have the time and space to get out of the way or extend the distance away, you may just have to come about and go for the head-on. With a little bit of luck and accuracy, you may just emerge unscathed whilst the bomber is left burning in your wake. However, this should not detract from the nature of the A6M3 Mod 22. It is the embodiment of the best characteristics from the A6M2 and the A6M3 before it, whereby it has the great overall manoeuvrability and lethality at close range of the A6M2, imprinted onto the versatility and consistency with speed of the A6M3. And by using these characteristics hand in hand, we were able to come third by comparison with the rest of our team, taking over the higher altitude positions and then forcing our opponents below us to stall out as they tried to climb after us. To beat this aircraft, you need to face it on level altitude or from above, and continue to hit and run it with increasing speed, as even if you miss, the Mod 22 will not be able to catch you, and by doing so you can eventually whittle down its energy state and force it into a position whereby it will eventually fall victim to your machine guns or cannons. Nonetheless, if you are looking for a fighter which is able to perform the dance of death around its opponents and strike fear into their hearts, then the A6M3 Mod 22 Reisen is the fighter for you. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. Yet until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.